As you guys know, my name is Ramya. I'm the Director of Environmental Science for the Key Biscayne Community Foundation. Let me introduce Erin. This is Erin from Miami Waterkeeper, and she's going to talk to you about all the different things that they do at Miami Waterkeeper. You may recall 2 months ago, we had somebody here who talked about water quality during a panel discussion. She was here with that guy from NOAA that talked about hurricanes and then left later that day to fly into a hurricane. So she's going to talk to you more about Miami Waterkeeper, not just the water quality stuff, but all of the different things that they do. And they do a lot of things here around Miami to keep our water safe.
Thank you, Ramya. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good. Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here today. Show of hands, has anybody here not heard of Miami Waterkeeper before? Okay, awesome. Well, welcome. So like Ramya mentioned, I'm going to be doing kind of just a brief overview of Miami Waterkeeper, kind of the threats that specifically Miami face in terms of climate change and pollution, and then the work that we do to help mitigate that and how we get the community involved. So first, I just want to start off with a land acknowledgement. Folks who have been here for long or have lived here all their life. Obviously, Indigenous culture is very important to our community, so just wanted to take a moment to recognize the Indigenous tribes that were here before us. So our mission is to protect South Florida waterways. We do conservation of Biscayne Bay and just waterways all throughout South Florida, and we really do that through advocating for resilient solutions. But more importantly, we want that work that we do to be grounded in science and rooted in community. So we want, rooted in nature and driven by community. This is a new mission statement, gotta learn it. But the work that we do really involves our community and getting folks involved in how they can help make a difference and help Miami Waterkeeper protect our precious ecosystems. So hopefully everybody knows what this body of water is. Any guesses? Biscayne Bay, amazing. And I don't want to just talk at you guys for an hour, so please participate, holler, shout out, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask right in the middle. So Biscayne Bay is obviously very important to South Florida, and obviously here on the Key, super important. It brings in about 19% of the county's economic output. So in addition to being a beautiful place to recreate and, you know, a big source of habitat, ecosystems, it also is really, really important to our economy. And they did a study last year, and the annual economic contribution of Biscayne Bay for the county is $64 billion. Yeah, so that is how much, in terms of all the services that Biscayne Bay provides us, that is how much it is valued at, $64 billion. So it is incredibly important to South Florida, to Miami. Unfortunately, though, we are facing a lot of issues, a lot of environmental issues here in South Florida and in Miami, and I'm sure probably every single one of you has at least experienced one of these threats, whether that's rising sea level, pollution, or habitat degradation. Have you guys seen like flooding? Have you guys seen a lot of pollution? Yeah. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with this, and unfortunately it's just becoming more and more common as climate change and these global issues become more prevalent. And I'm not sure if you folks know, but Miami is ground zero for climate change, just based on kind of where we are, our elevation, yeah. Actually I can't remember where exactly this was, but our science and research team was out a few weeks ago doing like a boat patrol. They were on Biscayne Bay, just searching for potential sources of pollution. And this was sewage being dumped right into our waterways. Yeah, so unfortunately this happens quite frequently, and we'll talk a little bit about it later. But we have different types of pollution that are just constantly entering the bay, whether it's directly, you know, people, whether it's a lack of knowledge or ignorance, just disposing of waste in our bay, or if it's like marine debris where it kind of finds its way there. So our approach, we are first and foremost a science-based organization. So we really want all of our work to be scientifically sound and have the best up-to-date scientific research. So we have our science and research team, and then our science and research informs the policy and advocacy work that we do. So the work that we do with our elected officials, our county commissioners, all of that is based in research. And then, of course, lastly, we want to bring in the community. We want to educate the folks that live here. We want to educate students about the issues that are going on and basically give them the tools and knowledge necessary to be advocates and protectors for our amazing water resources. And I'm part of the education and outreach team. So our focus areas, even though we do a lot of different things, we wear a lot of different hats. Our main focus areas are clean water, thriving habitats, and sea level rise resilience. So we want Miami to be resilient in terms of climate change. We want our habitats to be healthy. We want our plants and animals to be healthy and happy. And we want to have clean water. Does anybody here know the history of the Waterkeeper Alliance? So Miami Waterkeeper, we are actually just one of 300 plus organizations around the world that are members of this global organization called the Waterkeeper Alliance. And how it started was back in the 1950s, there was a group of fishermen that were working on the Hudson River up in New York, and they noticed over the years that their harvests were declining, and they realized that it was because the quality of the Hudson River was drastically going down. And through their experience just working and living on this waterway, they knew that it came from the pollution that was entering the water, and there was nobody there holding these polluters accountable. So they formed the Waterkeeper Alliance, which was a citizen organization, but until the Clean Water Act was passed in the 1970s, they didn't really have the power to take legal action against these polluters. But along came the Clean Water Act, and they were able, as citizens, to hold these polluters accountable on a legal level. Does everybody here know Rachel? Yes. So Rachel Silverstein, she is our waterkeeper and CEO. She came aboard about 4 years after Miami Waterkeeper was started. It was started in 2010, but it was really just one person, kind of a volunteer position, and then Rachel came aboard, and it's blown up from there. So she's been here for 10 years now, and it started with just Rachel, and now we are a team of 23 full-time people, right, Gretchen? 23. Gretchen back there is our Chief Finance Officer. She is here today, so if you have any operations or finance questions, you can ask her. But so we have grown really significantly, which is amazing because that means our capacity and our reach has grown, so we're able to do so much. I'm gonna read every single one of these, but these are just a few of our major milestones and the impact that we've had throughout the years. Things, let's see, we have stopped over 5,000 gallons of herbicide use from entering our waterways every year. We've removed over 20,000 pounds of marine debris from our waterways. We have helped pass 6 styrofoam or single-use plastic bans by working with county commissioners and a bunch more stuff. We do a lot. You guys are familiar with the Port Miami dredging? Yeah, so back in 2013 to 2015, they were dredging the port, and they said that only 6 corals were going to be killed, basically, in the process by sedimentation. Is everybody familiar with sedimentation? Yeah, okay, great. We went out after the fact and found that it was more like 500,000 corals had died because of the sedimentation, and unfortunately, Miami, we do not have the facilities, the infrastructure, the resources to do coral restoration on that scale. We were luckily able to restore about 10,000 corals, but that's still a fraction of the corals that actually died because of this dredging project. I'm sure you are all familiar with Biscayne Bay. I don't want to focus too much on it. Was anybody here born and raised in Miami? Sort of. Or if you've been here longer than...
I came here at 12, but I'm 80, so...
Okay, yeah, so you count. Okay, yeah, so basically born and raised here, absolutely. Have you guys noticed any changes in the bay from since when you first were here or born versus now? Yeah, it's dirtier, the clarity has changed, absolutely, so the water quality has changed drastically, and that's unfortunately because of human activity and the pollution and the degradation of the water quality. But obviously Biscayne Bay is really, really important here in Miami, and we're working to hopefully restore it and get it back to that beautiful, pristine condition that it once was.
Look at that. Oh my God.
So we recently got a drone. So we've been having a lot of fun collecting drone images and videos. I love that you guys recognize all these areas. So these are just different examples of the parts of the waterways that we work in. We work in, marinas. We work in the Atlantic side. We work in canals. We work in Biscayne Bay. So really, any waterways in South Florida, we try to help advocate for. This was probably 4th of July or one of the holiday weekends. But even now, it's such a stunning body of water. Even with all of the human activity and the pollution, it's still so beautiful and so important to Miami and our community. A lot of the pollution that we get in our waterways comes from land-based sources. So of course there are a lot of boaters who are not very smart or responsible, and they dispose of their trash and debris overboard, or they empty their their wastewater into the waterways. But a lot of it comes from those land-based sources of pollution. The stormwater system, those drains on the street, everything that happens on land, whether it's trash, oil, gas, chemicals, when it rains, that goes down into the stormwater drains and then it discharges into the bay. So any type of pollution that's happening on land is affecting our waterways. Alrighty, so we talked about how our focus areas were clean water, thriving habitats, and sea level rise resiliency. Does anybody know, based on these videos, the 3 main habitats that we focus on here in Miami? You can just shout it out. Mangroves, absolutely. What else? What are these? Coral. And this? Seagrass, absolutely. So we really focus a lot of our efforts in terms of thriving habitats on mangroves, corals, and seagrass beds. Now, can anybody tell me why these habitats are important? Let me go back. Yeah, absolutely. So it's habitat for a lot of the animals and plants that we have here. Any other reason why these habitats are important? Yep, so it helps kind of filter the water, absolutely. What are we just getting out of now in Florida, in Miami? What season? Hurricane season. So mangroves are kind of our first line of defense in terms of protecting our coastal communities from hurricanes, from wind, from waves. Healthy coral reefs are also really, really great at kind of absorbing wave energy. So when we have healthy coral reefs, it's kind of like a natural barrier protecting our communities from, really powerful storms. Seagrass beds are really important because they are food for a lot of the animals that we love, our manatees, our sea turtles, but they also are really important for younger fish species. It's a great place for them to hide. It's a great habitat. They also are aquatic plants. So they photosynthesize and help produce oxygen that helps oxygenate, oh, that's a tough one, helps oxygenate our water.
By anywhere from 50 to 75%. Wow. They reduce the energy from those waves.
Yeah. And a healthy coral reef it's absorb about 90 up to 95% of a wave's energy. So rather than having a man-made cement seawall, we can have these natural healthy habitats kind of provide those services for us. Now, unfortunately, some of the threats that we see to clean water are up here. We have sewage, which we saw in the video earlier, fertilizer, stormwater, and septic tanks. Does anybody here have a septic tank? No. Do you guys know why septic tanks are a really big source of pollution here in Miami? Yeah, absolutely. So when Miami was being developed, it was growing so quickly that the city planners and the developers were like, how do we keep up with the infrastructure needs? And they're like, oh, well, septic tanks are working really great up in the Midwest. Let's bring them down here. But one thing they didn't account for was sea level rise. The way that septic tanks work they're buried in your yard. They're about 6 feet below your yard. And what's supposed to happen is it's supposed to have 2 feet of unsaturated soil before it reaches the water table, our aquifer. So what happens is you have your waste from your house come into the septic tank, the liquids and the solids are separated, and then the liquids seep out and kind of get naturally filtered through that 2 feet of unsaturated soil before it reaches our water table. However, we're experiencing sea level rise here in Miami. So that 2 feet of unsaturated soil is getting smaller and smaller. So we have about 160,000 septic tanks in Miami-Dade County, and about 54 to 56% of those septic tanks are compromised or already failing. So that is raw, untreated human waste going directly into our waterways. And I'm sorry I'm talking about this while you guys are eating. I'll try to speed through that part. But this is a really, really big source of pollution, and because it's underground, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So a lot of people don't think about this as a major source of pollution. You know, they think about marine debris or trash because that's what they see. But these are really big sources of pollution. We talked about stormwater a little bit earlier. Our infrastructure is also failing. It's pretty old and we haven't really kept up with it. So we're having a lot of sewage leaks. So we are getting, notifications of sewage leaks pretty frequently just all around the county, whether it's partially treated sewage, whether it's raw sewage going into our waterways. And then lastly, fertilizer. Yeah, so that's actually a huge win. We're going to be celebrating that soon, but basically the county kind of put forth a ordinance that really protects and keeps the water that is going into our storm water systems and being discharged into Biscayne Bay. It's a lot cleaner. So there are more regulations, there's going to be more enforcement. I don't know the specifics. I don't know if you know the specifics. But basically it's just putting more regulations and reinforcement to ensure that the water that's going into our stormwater system and being discharged into Biscayne Bay is not full of pollutants and trash. And I can give you a contact for somebody at Miami Waterkeeper who can talk to you more about that. Lastly, fertilizer. Why might fertilizer be a harmful pollutant to Biscayne Bay? Chemicals, absolutely. So fertilizer, the way it works, it's plant food, right? You put it on your lawns, it makes your lawns grow big and beautiful. But what people don't realize is that when they fertilize, especially in the rainy season, when it rains, it doesn't even have time to absorb into your lawn. It just runs off and goes right in directly to our waterway or goes through the stormwater system and goes into Biscayne Bay. And it's basically steroids for the algae that we have growing in the bay, which can really, really be harmful for just the general balance of the ecosystem and also the animals living there. And we'll talk about more of that later. Do you guys remember the 2020 fish kill? August of 2020. A lot of it was because of a culmination of all of these pollutants going into our bay, and it resulted in 27,000 plus dead fish and other species that died in the bay. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later. Alrighty, so some threats that we have to our habitats. I've talked a little bit about dredging earlier, but this is a great example of what happens when there are not proper regulations and basically safety measures for, this is dredging again. So normally, I wonder if I have a picture of it. I don't. Normally there is a yellow sediment boom, they call it. Have you seen those like yellow barriers? So normally for dredging, because what happens is dredging, they're taking sediment from the bottom and they're trying to widen or deepen a channel. And sand moves, water moves, so what happens is they're supposed to have a sediment boom that keeps the sediment in a designated area. But they're obviously not doing that here. And what's happening is that all of this sand and this sediment that's leaking out is going to go back into the water column, and it's not gonna settle right back where it was taken from. It's gonna travel and settle somewhere else where it probably shouldn't be. A lot of times, and especially with the Port Miami dredging project, it settled on all those corals. So that's what happened with those corals. They were literally smothered to death by sediment. Yeah.
Why was that not supervised and policed? I mean, they went on, it wasn't just a couple of days they worked for a long time.
Yeah.
Surely, over that period, somebody would have said, you're not using booms, you're not controlling this. Call politicians.
Yeah, so unfortunately, you know, developers and the port, they have a lot of influence, they have a lot of money, and oftentimes, yeah, it's a lack of they don't care, or it's cheaper for them to be fined for not following the regulations than it is for them to actually put in place the measures that are supposed to be taken. Yeah, so that is a huge issue, is that the enforcement, but also just the fine oftentimes is barely nothing for the developers. So it's not worth it to, you know, put more time and money into actually following, you know, regulations. I'm sure you guys have experienced this at one point, flooding. Yeah. So we've seen that a couple times already just in the last few months, and this is really affecting Miami's resilience. Yeah.
Why can't that be criminal, so that they face jail rather than fines, which they don't mind paying fines?
Right, yeah, so that's one thing that we are trying to work on. Obviously, it's a very complex, lengthy legal process. We right now, I think trying to make it criminal is just out of our, you know, bandwidth right now. We are just trying to up the fines and increase enforcement. I love that idea. I don't even know how we would go about that, but it's just, again, the developers and the dredgers have so much money and influence, and a lot of the elected officials and the people running our county, you know, are very pro-development, and we're absolutely not anti-development by any means. We just want them to be sustainable and responsible. So this is just kind of an outline of our key focus areas and the things that we're working on. So this is kind of just a nice wrap-up slide of what we talked about. So sea level rise resilience. I heard somebody say Turkey Point, because I think they saw in the video. You guys are familiar with Turkey Point? So we are working right now. Turkey Point is the nuclear power plant down south, and they want to extend their operating license farther or longer, I guess, than any other nuclear power plant has ran in the future, or in the past. They'll be the longest running nuclear power plant in the country. That is an issue, though, because the environmental impact statement that they were using to justify extending their license was from the 1990s. So a little bit out of date, and they were not taking into account updated and accurate sea level rise projections. And I don't know if I have a slide in here, but I can share our policy team's information if you guys have more questions about kind of more of our policy work. But basically, we were in litigation with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, asking them, you know, we don't want to shut down Turkey Point. We don't, you know, want them to not be able to extend their license. We just want them to do an updated, accurate environmental impact statement to see if it's even safe to operate this far into the future. So we're still in, you know, current litigation with them right now, but I think it's leaning towards, hopefully, they will be forced to do an updated environmental impact statement, EIS. Back Bay study. Is anybody here familiar with Back Bay? So if you're not, basically the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, to help with storm surge, they wanted to put up at some areas, a 30-foot cement wall along Brickell and along Biscayne Bay to help mitigate storm surge and flooding in Miami. The way that they calculated where the wall would go was a cost-benefit analysis. So that meant that areas with high property value would be on the other side of the wall, so the water would be directed into communities that didn't have a lot of high property value. So it was not a community-forward approach. And I wonder if I have a picture. I wish I had a picture, but we had a firm do a rendering of what that wall would look like. And you know, you walk along Biscayne Bay, downtown, you have a beautiful view of the bay. There would be a 30-foot cement wall right there. Nobody wants that. It's not community forward, and it's also not nature-based forward. So there are a lot of nature-based or green infrastructure solutions that we could incorporate to serve the same purposes, but also be a lot long-term, be more aesthetically pleasing, and also just working with nature to provide similar solutions. Alrighty, so I know this is a lot. If you guys have any questions, again, feel free to stop me at any time, but I'm gonna dive into kind of our core programs teams and the things that we're working on to fight all of these issues. Our key players in terms of responding to events like a massive fish kill. So in August of 2020 through, I think it was 5 days, over 5 days, we got a ton of pollution reports about dead fish just washing up everywhere throughout the bay. And we had almost 500 photos and videos submitted of this happening all along Biscayne Bay. And one of our staff members actually had to count every single fish in every photo and identify what species it was. So that's how we figured out that it was 27,000 plus dead fish that washed up. 56 different species, and the ultimate cause was there was zero oxygen in the water. There was zero dissolved oxygen, so these fish were suffocating. And I've heard stories of, people out on the water and they could see sharks and rays all along the spoil islands and fish gasping for air at the surface. It was very devastating. And it was just because it was kind of like a perfect storm. It was a really hot summer, and hot water inherently holds less oxygen, and all those types of pollutions that we talked about.
I just wanted to add to that. At the time this happened, I was doing another degree at the Rosenstiel School, and I worked in the toadfish lab. And most of those fat fish in that picture, those are toadfish. Toadfish are extraordinarily resilient fish. They can live through all kinds of pollution and low oxygen and really bad conditions. But there's like a drop-off point, right? Like they're really resilient to a point, more so than other fish. And then there's a drop-off point where they can't anymore. And so you have to imagine how bad the conditions must have been that all of these toadfish were killed. And then as far as what Erin was just saying about people having stories about sharks and rays that were floundering, Pelican Harbor posted on their social media about where they were in the bay. Right in their little inlet area, there was rays, a lot of them, just kind of floundering in the shallows, because when you're in shallow water, there's more the closer you are to the surface, the more oxygen exchange there is with the air. So they're trying to stay in the shallowest water because there's a better chance of getting more oxygen than deeper water. And so what they just started doing is taking fish tank bubblers and things like that and just putting them in the water all around in their little inlet just to try to give these fish more oxygen because there was no oxygen in the water. It was really bad.
Yeah, and I think the Coast Guard or the fire department, they were out there putting their hoses in the water, trying to aerate the water. We were just trying last-ditch efforts, anything that we could to put oxygen back in the water. But yeah, like Romeo was saying, we sometimes see smaller fish kills. A lot of times we see puffers. They are a lot less tolerant than toadfish, but the fact that we were seeing so many toadfish meant that even some of the most resilient, tolerable species were being affected from basically zero dissolved oxygen in the water. So in addition to, our water quality program and crisis response, we're also constantly trying to do research and make sure that the work that we're doing is up to date and accurate. So we've produced 7 peer-reviewed publications. We have been involved in reviewing, technical scientific reports for the government or for contractors. And we also were, in addition to monitoring for enterococci, the fecal indicator bacteria, we also were looking in nutrients. So nutrients obviously sound like a good thing, but nutrients are like phosphorus and nitrogen, a lot of the chemicals that are in fertilizer. And too much of that in our waterways can be really, really detrimental. So we were trying to identify what types of nutrients and where they were coming from. So we're constantly hopping on different research projects and really just trying to get a deeper understanding of what the state of our water is and where it's coming from and things that we can do to help fix it. Education and outreach, I'm biased, but this is my favorite part of Miami Waterkeeper. So this is what I do, again, is taking the science and research and the policy work that we're doing and conveying that to community and getting the community involved in the work that we do. So we have several different programs. One of our programs is the 1,000 Eyes on the Water, and that is our pollution detection and reporting program. So we go all over the county. We work with student groups, groups like this, and we basically do a training on the types of pollution, how to identify it, and then how to report it to us. So we can contact the necessary agencies to stop that pollution, issue a citation, mitigate it, whatever the situation is. And we've talked about some of these sources, but we see a lot of oil spills. Another oil spill, this is sedimentation. This is the sediment boom that I was talking about. So even if there is a sediment boom, a lot of the times it's not maintained or installed properly, so it's not doing anything. And again, if we were to contact these developers, they would be fined and just go along their way. Marine debris is a really big issue. We have huge concentrations of marine debris. And then this is another example of a sewage leak underwater. We also do a lot with the youth here in Miami. So we have our youth education programs. So myself and my team, we take students out on floating classrooms or just on the beach. Usually we do Virginia Key, and we get them engaged in hands-on science and conservation activities. So we really want to spark that interest and show them that science and conservation can be fun. So we do water quality testing with them. We do activities about habitat loss and being more sustainable. Usually we do a marine debris cleanup with every program, so they get that service component, and they can also help remove the debris from our beaches or directly from our waterways. So we really just try to get them engaged, be as hands-on as possible, and show them that being a scientist or being an advocate is really, really important. One of my favorite programs that we do at Miami Waterkeeper is the Junior Ambassador Program. So with these programs, with the floating classroom and the Youth Environmental Action Days, we really only see these kids once. We take them out on the water for a few hours, plant the seed, and then send them on their way. But our Junior Ambassador Program is really cool because we get to spend a whole year with these students. So this is, every year we take a cohort of high school students, and they go through advocacy trainings and service events and different research projects. So not only are they getting community service hours or participating in volunteer cleanups, they're learning the really important and critical skills to be advocates. And I always like to say, obviously we want them to be advocates for the environment, but I try to teach them skills that they can use to be advocates for themselves and their community, and skills that they can use in any aspect of their lives. Even if they're not planning on going into the science or the environmental field, they have these skills and they're building these skills that will help them in any field and in any aspect of life. But they get to do some really cool stuff. Their graduation trip is shark tagging, so that is really fun, and I get to go every year, so I love it. But it's really awesome. We go out with field school, and they get to actually participate in real shark science. They get to take blood samples, they get to take fin samples, measurements. It's really, really cool. And then we just do general volunteer events for the public. So again, we want to get the community involved, give them opportunities to not only help, protect our waterways, but just get in the water, get on the water. So we do, marine debris cleanups, we do habitat restorations and kayak cleanups, which are really great, really fun for the community to get involved. And then lastly, policy and advocacy. So this is kind of like the powerhouse of Miami Waterkeeper. This is where we get higher change affected, basically. So our policy team advocates for policies that are good for the community and good for the environment. And we work on different levels. We really try to focus on the local level, working with our community, but we also have gotten involved in state and federal advocacy work as well. So some examples are, like we talked about the Port Miami, we use the Endangered Species Act because the corals, they were endangered corals. They really work to stop sewage leaks. This is the Tricky Point, the FPL's nuclear reactor. That's been years in the making. Working with the elected officials and county commissioners to inform them and to help pass regulations that limit how much nutrient pollution is going into our waterways. We're also working right now trying to stop marine debris at the source. So we do a lot of cleanups, which are great, but it's kind of just a Band-Aid for, it's just treating a symptom rather than treating the actual root cause. So we're trying to limit how much, especially single-use plastic is being introduced and used into the county and the environment. And also reducing harmful herbicides and other toxic chemicals that are entering our waterways. And that is just a fraction of what they do. They are absolutely incredible. So we talked about how the economic output was $64 billion. So that is not necessarily like direct money coming from the Bay. That could be ecosystem services that the Bay provides us that we have assigned a monetary value to, but it also comes from the recreation, the ecotourism, the fishing industry. So it's kind of just a grand total of how much the Bay, in a monetary sense. Yeah, especially because, fishing and boating has gotten so much bigger, recreation, ecotourism, all that stuff is just, and it's such a big part of our economy, absolutely. So the thing with pollution is that obviously our open seas, our oceans are getting polluted, increasingly so, but the main thing is the size of it and the water flow. So a lot of the pollution that enters our oceans, absolutely, we have a lot of marine debris that we see from other countries that have traveled through, currents and waves and come into the Bay. But a lot of things, especially with, chemicals or nutrients, it's so big that it kind of gets diluted and there's a lot of water flow. So it's constantly flushing out. Whereas in the Bay, especially northern Biscayne Bay, where there's not that connection to the open ocean, it doesn't get flushed out. It's kind of just stagnant. And so all of that pollution that's going into the Bay is basically staying there. It's not moving, it's not getting flushed out.
To us because of the pollution.
So that is a great question. There is I think it's an app, it's called Seafood Watch, and you can see where your seafood's coming from and if it was sustainably caught, but there is something called bioaccumulation that happens. So there might be trash or pollution in the waterways. The fish eat it, it kind of accumulates into their bodies, and then as humans eat it, there's always the potential that we could be eating that pollution as well. So it is really hard to tell, and it's really just where you're getting your seafood from, if it was sustainably sourced or if it was, a sustainable farm, how it was harvested. I don't know if you have anything to add about that, but.
I can try. So seafood tracking is one of the most difficult things to do. And it is an ongoing sort of problem. But there are at least the fish farms and things here in the States have to go through a lot of regulations in order for their fish to be, their fish or shrimp or whatever it is that they're raising is decided to be safe enough for consumption. So, that's something to keep in mind. Wild caught fish, there's still regulations in place, but it's a little bit more difficult to track because as you've seen, there's a lot of things going on in the water. We don't really know what they've been exposed to. And then you have the fact that fish move. So they might hang out in Biscayne Bay for a little while, absorbing all the grossness, and then they'll just travel out somewhere else that's a lot cleaner, go up Silver River or something, and it's much cleaner there, and they're doing better there. And you just don't know how much did they absorb, how much is in their body. It's definitely difficult to tell. So it's one of those things that takes a lot of research. The app does help. It does help to track where some of the things are coming from. But it's an ongoing problem, and it is something that a lot of different organizations are working on and advocating for, because they don't also feel like there's enough regulation in place that really properly tracks where seafood comes from.
I mean, we're kind of seeing it already, just even with the sunny day flooding, it hasn't rained and it still floods, especially with tides and king tide. We're already seeing the effects of sea level rise and climate change. I personally don't know an exact number, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. I know there's definitely projections. I don't know, Romeo, if you have more.
On the Citizen Science website, it's called keyscience.org. There's a tab that says sea level rise. And several years ago, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, we did a series of town hall meetings specifically about sea level rise. And we hired a consulting company that did projections of sea level rise on Key Biscayne. And so I think it goes all the way, I want to say 2045 or maybe something around there. And they give different levels of projections because it's, these are what the projections look like if you do absolutely no mitigation and don't do anything and just let it happen. And then there's projections on if you do some level of mitigation beforehand, and then the highest level of mitigation and what it would look like. So it was kind of to show everybody these are the things that you should consider going forward, what we should try to do, because this is what it will likely look like in the future. And you can download that report from the website. The short answer is maybe. It's hard to say whether or not, what things it's going to affect. There's a lot of things with every administration that's always like very concerning. I don't disagree with you and your concerns, but until the ball starts rolling, we don't know like how far it's going to roll. You know what I mean? We don't know what changes are going to happen and how bad or negligible they will be. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly a concern, and at this point we can only just kind of wait and see. And if it ends up being something bad, then we have another election in 2 years and another one in 4 years, and we just have to really, really and this is why voting is very important, but also knowing your representatives and knowing who you're voting for and what they stand for is extremely important. So it's just one of those things that we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens and hope for the best. And then, see if it doesn't go our way, then hope for change later.
I will just say real quick on that level, luckily, there are some things, especially federally and nationally, that we can't control in terms of politics and administration. But here in Miami, we're really lucky. We work very closely with Mayor Daniela Levine Cava, and she is very, very, aware of the issues and is very concerned about the community and how Miami is being affected by climate change and sea level rise. So luckily we have her on her side, so we can really, do what we can, especially on a local level, to make sure that at least Miami, is safe and we can safeguard some protections for our community. So that's kind of the silver lining and the positive side of that thing is that we still can affect change at a local level, even if we can't really do anything, on a federal level for the next few years.
Yes, does that include lobster and stone crabs too?
The Seafood Watch? Yeah. So you if you go into the grocery store, with the app you can scan the barcode. I think it's the barcode, right? Or the packaging, and it tells you exactly where it comes from, if it's sustainable, how it was harvested. So it's really helpful, for sure.
Again, the short answer is maybe. Generally speaking, in the States, like I said, there are a lot of regulations in place, and they do have to pass inspections and things like that. So if it's from the States, usually, yes. And when there are issues that come up, that farm will have to shut down until they can fix those issues. Just like what happened with that meat factory in Virginia recently. They were fine until they weren't, and then they had to shut down, and now they're working on that. But a lot of our seafood, especially farm-raised seafood, comes from overseas. A lot of Asian countries have huge, huge farms. Most of our shrimp is actually sourced from there. And, they still have to pass certain inspections in order to be able to trade that with the U.S. But how well that's enforced is a different issue because we don't have any say in how they enforce things overseas. So, it's, again, the tracking where it comes from is usually the best bet.
I've not heard about mercury in the Everglades lately. Do you have an update maybe?
I am not familiar with that issue. I would assume it's not that big of an issue if we're not hearing about it. I love seafood. I eat sushi all the time. Sorry, Ramya, I know she doesn't eat fish. And I'm fine. Hopefully, I don't have mercury poisoning. But kind of like Ramya was saying, especially if you buy, locally sourced, you have a better idea of where it's coming from, even though, fish travel, they move. But there are a few good, like aquaculture and farms here in Miami. I think, have you heard of Blue Sapphire?
Yeah.
It's the salmon one. So we work with a few of them, and there's sustainable fisheries here and farms that if you just, do a little research, I don't remember all the names, but you definitely, even though some of it's out of your control, you can still kind of pick those things, yeah. But I'll look into that. That's a good question.
I don't really know anything about mercury, but I do know that you have a higher chance of heavy metal issues with wild-caught fish. And for instance, I'm from northern Indiana. Actually, I moved here about 10 years ago. And the St. Joe River goes right across like the northern boundary of Indiana. And a lot of people fish in that river. And they actually stock it with salmon. The salmon grow up in the river. They go out to Lake Michigan thinking that's the ocean. And then they come back up the river and people fish them. And they tell you that per month you shouldn't eat more than, I think it was at the time, like 3 pounds of the salmon from the St. Joe River because of lead. And so, they put out these warnings, but if you don't actually like see the warnings or hear them, because it's not like a TV commercial that you're going to see constantly, they don't they don't really do a good job of getting that message out. So it's one of those things, sometimes you kind of have to search for it in order to know like what these limitations are. But yeah, as far as mercury here, I don't actually know because, again, I haven't heard anything. So that doesn't mean that it's not an issue. It just may not be as big of an issue, or it's just not very well disseminated to the public.
I think this video is on our website if you want to check it out. It's really nice, and I know we talked about a lot of negatives, but I don't want this conversation to scare you by any means. We have done a lot of damage, but we are still at a point where we can turn it around and we can make a difference for, for the good, for the positive. We talked a little bit about Give Miami Day. I'm not going to do a plug because Key Biscayne Community Foundation, we love them. But we have this really nice video that kind of sums up everything that I said and really is a nice, just a video of kind of the work that we do.
We have already measured 6 inches of sea level rise since 1996, and just that 6 inches has already resulted in over 400% more flooding events. We are at the leading edge here of needing to find solutions to make our community resilient. A lot of these issues that we deal with are really dire, but I have seen the needle move from the work that we do here at Miami Waterkeeper, and that gives me a lot of hope that if we can have a big enough voice, we can grow the power of this community to make change and be a shining example of resilience for the entire world.
All of our water is connected. This is the same water that runs off of our backyards, the streets. Our land-based sources of pollution end up here. Since coming to Miami Waterkeeper, I've had the opportunity to respond to different events. And in that response, what we do is come up with a very standardized protocol, and we apply that so that we can get a good snapshot view of why this is happening.
Everything we do in Miami Waterkeeper is science-based. We do extensive research, and that requires time and technical expertise. So we sometimes need to look to a whole wide other variety of parameters to give more context. I get to advocate for my passion, which is water. And I love knowing that I contribute to sharing important science-based information about the health of our environment for people to swim in those waters. We need to hold accountable the people that are polluting our waters so we can stop the sources of pollutions. But we also need to have the science to be able to come up with possible solutions.
Miami Waterkeeper has a theory of change. It starts with science, and those scientific outcomes are relayed to policy team for incorporation into good protective policy measures. We have a lot of wins, and we have a lot of moments where we say, wow, our advocacy really worked. We got the county to change most of the canal spraying to mechanical harvesting and therefore not introduce dangerous, harmful chemicals that eventually migrate into the bay. In 2020, we joined a suit with the Center for Biological Diversity and Wild Earth Guardians to get NOAA to designate critical habitat for the Nassau grouper. In January of 2024, we won. It's a keystone species in our region, and this is strategic. If we protect critical habitat for the Nassau grouper, we're also protecting habitat for many other creatures that depend on the same habitat. We are working on a legal case around Turkey Point. The reactor is right in Hurricane Alley, between Biscayne Bay and the Everglades, a low-lying area that is going to flood from climate change. We are trying to get the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to pay attention to this. It's critical. Building and working in coalitions is essential. I think that is our value proposition. We boil down the outcomes of our policy research into its essence, and we relay those outcomes to the community.
One of the big accomplishments of the Education and Outreach Department and why I love doing this work is that we get to connect people with these amazing resources. Most of the students that we work with or take out on the boat for floating classrooms or on the beach for our youth environmental action days were born and raised in Miami or grew up here and have never been on a boat before, didn't know Biscayne Bay was here. Even though this is such a big part of our community, they've just never had opportunities. We get to educate them and help build the skills and the knowledge necessary to be advocates and warriors and champions for our waterways and our communities. Thousand Eyes on the Water is our pollution detection and reporting program. So we host community trainings around the county and educate folks on the different types of pollution. They can report it to us, and then we contact the necessary agencies to resolve the pollution or issue a citation. We do monthly kayak cleanups right at Crandon to remove really big concentrations of trash and debris that are in our waterways. Another type of volunteer event that we do is bring folks into the hammock and the dune habitats to help the City of Miami Parks and Rec remove invasive plant species and then also plant native species. There's 160 acres of green space, and the City of Miami rely on volunteers like Miami Waterkeeper volunteers to help come out and restore these habitats. We're not just bringing volunteers out to remove marine debris, we're really trying to create a movement of educated Miami residents who have the tools and the knowledge to protect our waterways in Biscayne Bay. In the end, we conserve only what we love only what we understand, and we understand only what we're taught.
At Miami Waterkeeper, part of our power and our impact comes from being able to react to things we can't predict. And that's why these unrestricted gifts from the partnership program are so critically important. And your gift has given us the ability to be able to respond, to react, to pivot, to be there when our community and our environment needs us most.
Thank you, thank you. So that was basically just a 6-minute version of what I was just talking to you guys about for the last hour. But do we have any final questions before I leave you guys today?
My name is Gretchen Clark. I'm a 25-year resident of Key Biscayne. I joined Miami Waterkeeper about 1.5 years ago, and I joined them because of all the work that they're doing for the water here. And they test 4 water quality sites here, and I've known them for that, and also see the gas and things, and of course some of the other issues that came up with the sewage system. But they've done an enormous amount of work. I'm very proud that they help us conserve our water here. Everyone on Key Biscayne loves the water. And so I would encourage everyone, next week is Give Miami Day week, or Day week, and please, please, either give to the Key Biscayne Community Foundation, because they do an enormous amount of great work here, and we work very closely with them, or give to Miami Waterkeeper. $10 helps us. That's all I can say. So, thank you. Thank you.
How wonderful it is to see the CEO, a woman, and the other leadership, mainly women, and a lot of the people like yourself involved. And that makes me proud as a woman.
Thank you, thank you. We have one man on our team, the rest we are all women, so we are definitely a women-led and run organization. Yep. We get stuff done. But thank you all so much. If you have more questions, I'm happy to give my email. I think I might have a few business cards. Rumia can also pass along my information. If you have more technical questions about policy or science, I'm happy to connect you with our policy director and our science director as well. But thank you all so much. I really appreciate the questions and your engagement, and I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day.